During the December 4th City Council meeting, the City Council was unable to pass the Building Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, or BERDO, because it was ultimately chartered by Councilor Lenny Gentile until the next City Council meeting on December 16th. The goal of BERDO is for buildings to reach net zero emissions by 2050. One of 3 amendments to the ordinance passed, with Newton Wellesley Hospital to receive some exemptions and a specialized process to receive additional exemptions as needed. Councilor Lisle Baker and Councilor John Oliver explain the ordinance.
This is a request for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting. Councilors Albright, Danberg, and Leary, on behalf of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy, requesting discussion and an ordinance that would require large property owners, campuses, and large commercial buildings to report energy use and associated greenhouse gas emissions annually to the City of Newton, to be used to encourage reductions in said energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in accordance and support of the goals set forth in the Newton Climate Action Plan. And this item was voted by the committee 5-0-3, Councilors Albright, Kalis, and Krinsman abstaining, for recommendation to the full council. The item is a complicated document that is attached to the committee report. The committee report goes into some detail about the most recent meeting where we heard this time predominantly from residential property owners as well as a representative of Newton Wellesley Hospital. And the question was how to shape the ordinance in a positive direction. And the outcome was that we have an ordinance that applies to large commercial buildings, asks for energy use reporting by large residential buildings, and provides an exemption that was satisfactory to the administration for Newton Wellesley Hospital. My understanding is subsequent to the meeting that there had been further conversations, been a representative of the administration as well as Newton Wellesley Hospital, which will produce what I understood will be a recommended substitute for one specific provision of the ordinance. There may be other amendments that are forthcoming, but my hope is that the committee report will stand tonight and we will be able to vote and bring this forward.
Every building that is going to be impacted by this ordinance has several years within which they are going to be reporting their energy consumption or use for several years before the first possible changes or alterations to the building, whether it be in their HVAC systems or the building envelope itself, whether that's windows or insulation or what have you. All of those are subsequent to multiple years of reporting. However, it's also important to note that there are multiple ways for building owners to receive what I'm going to call some sort of a, alternate compliance plan, whether that is in their timing of when they have to comply and or the level of emissions that their building will be accommodated or what their target emissions are. The regulations are effectively all of the details that you do not see in this ordinance tonight. How are all these bits and pieces going to work? How are hardship plans going to be issued? What are the qualifications for them? Who's going to be, reviewing the different materials? Who's going to be publishing content? Where's that website going to live? So on and so forth. All of that information, all of those details will be figured out in the regulations. And we now have a 9-person panel that'll be helping the city build that set of regulations.
Newton Wellesley Hospital, Mass General Brigham Newton Wellesley, had some concerns about their ability to comply with the ordinance as drafted. In short, there are some federal requirements, some federal, both legislative and regulatory requirements on certain healthcare facilities. And there was a concern that they would not be able to comply with the ordinance as written. So the hospital wanted an exemption from the ordinance. The hospital folks drafted a sort of blanket exemption saying that the ordinance wouldn't apply to the hospital facility. The city, my understanding is that the city and the hospital met several times and tried to reach some sort of an agreement. The city ultimately drafted language that the city felt comfortable addressed the hospital's concerns, in part by creating a process through which the hospital could demonstrate an ability to sort of not comply. And at the discretion of the city, they would be able to be sort of waived from compliance if they regularly updated and demonstrated a continuing inability to comply. I'm sort of oversimplifying, but that's largely what the dispute came down to. In zoning and planning, recently at our most recent meeting, the committee took this up, took up the issue and discussed it at length. I proposed an amendment to the draft ordinance that would have been the blanket exemption from the hospital. The committee ultimately voted 4-4, meaning that that amendment did not get adopted. So the amendment, the ordinance that came out of ZAP included the city's proposed language that would have created a process for the hospital to receive an exemption. But again, the hospital wasn't 100% comfortable with that. Now, what this amendment is reflects a discussion that took place after the zoning and planning meeting, and the Newton Wellesley Hospital folks and the city folks agreed on essentially a compromise and alternative process for that exemption. And what this essentially does is exempts existing buildings where patients and medical facilities are today, and creates a process that sort of in a nutshell, the city could live with to grant them that ability to continue to comply with the other regulations imposed on the healthcare facilities. So my amendment would strike out the one section 20-181C, which is where that exemption sits, replace the zoning and planning language with the agreed upon language between both the folks from Mass General Brigham Newton Wellesley and the administration.
Mr. President, I would like to make a non-debatable motion to call a question if it's seconded.
I'll second it.
Motion fails, 10 yeas, 12 nays. Wait, hold on. 11 yeas, 12 nays, 1 recusal.
Okay, so the motion to call the question fails. The item is back before us. If there are no other amendments being proposed, I know Councilor Gentile, you expressed your intent earlier. Respectfully, I'm going to suggest if you're able to, at the very least, put your questions out there so that if we can answer them now, hopefully this item doesn't get chartered. If we can't answer them now and you then decide to charter it, as is your right, then at least we'll have teed up the questions so we're not engaged in further debate on this item next time. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Councilor Gentile.
I hear what you're saying, Mr. President, but after that lowest of lows by my colleague, Council Humphrey, I'm going to charter it now and not take any chances.
All right, the item is chartered. Motion, Councilor Leary, to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned at 8:55 p.m.